To understand why Northern Ireland exists, it helps to start with the deep historical roots of two distinct communities developing on the island. For many centuries, Ireland was home almost entirely to Gaelic Irish people. They shared a similar language, culture, and political structure based on clans and local chiefs. Society was decentralized, and loyalties tended to be local rather than national. This began to change in the late 1100s, when the English crown first became involved in Ireland. What started as a small intervention grew into a long, uneven process of English rule. For centuries, the English presence was limited mainly to a region around Dublin known as the Pale, but the English monarchy increasingly tried to exert control over the whole island. These efforts brought new legal systems, new forms of landholding, and English-speaking settlers. By the 1500s and 1600s, the process intensified. The English and later British state saw Ireland as strategically important and politically sensitive, especially as England became Protestant while most Irish remained Catholic. Religious difference reinforced political tension. The Crown encouraged waves of settlement by English and Scottish Protestants, who were expected to be loyal to the monarchy and bring stability to contested regions. Over time, two broad communities emerged. Gaelic Irish Catholic, rooted in traditional Irish culture, Catholic faith, and resistance to foreign rule. English Scottish Protestant settlers, tied to British identity, land ownership introduced by the Crown, and the Protestant religion. These weren't just abstract cultural differences, they shaped land ownership, political power, social class, and everyday life. While Catholic Irish formed a majority on the island, the Protestant settler population grew especially strong in the northern province of Ulster. By the early 1600s, the island contained two populations with different identities, loyalties, and visions for their future, setting the stage for the later division that created Northern Ireland. The Plantation of Ulster in the early 1600s is one of the most important events for understanding why Northern Ireland exists today. It dramatically reshaped the population of the northern part of the island and created the demographic and political divisions that still influence the region. After a series of conflicts, most notably the 9 Years' War, 1594–1603, the English crown sought to secure control over Ireland, especially the northern province of Ulster, which had been a stronghold of independent Gaelic lords. When these Irish leaders fled the country in 1607, a moment known as the Flight of the Earls, their lands were confiscated by the Crown. King James I transformed these confiscated lands into a massive colonization project called the Plantation of Ulster. Unlike earlier, smaller plantations elsewhere in Ireland, this one was large, systematic, and carefully planned. The Crown brought in thousands of settlers from England and Scotland, most of them Protestant, and granted them land taken from the native Irish population. These settlers were required to build towns, farm the land in English style, establish Protestant churches, and create loyal communities that would help maintain royal authority. This had several long-lasting effects. Demographic change. In Ulster, Protestants soon formed either a majority or a very large minority, especially in counties like Antrim, Down, and Londonderry. Cultural division. Settlers brought different languages, farming methods, legal systems, and religious practices. Economic transformation. New towns, markets, and industries developed in Ulster, making it more economically connected to Scotland and England than to the rest of Ireland. Land ownership shifts. Protestant settlers and landlords gained large estates, while many native Irish were displaced or reduced to tenants. By the late 1600s, Ulster had become a region with a distinctive identity, one far more closely aligned with Britain than with the Gaelic Irish South. This crucial divide laid the groundwork for the later partition and the creation of Northern Ireland. By the 1800s, Ireland had been politically united with Great Britain through the Act of Union, 1801, forming the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. While this was meant to stabilize Ireland under British rule, it unintentionally fueled a powerful movement for Irish self-government. Across the island, especially among the Catholic majority, many people felt politically marginalized and sought greater autonomy or full independence. This movement took various forms over the 19th century, from peaceful campaigns to revolutionary uprisings. A major goal for many Irish nationalists was Home Rule, the idea that Ireland should have its own parliament to manage domestic affairs while still remaining within the United Kingdom. Politicians like Charles Stewart Parnell turned Home Rule into a mass political cause. Over decades, Home Rule gained strong support across Catholic and nationalist areas, especially in the South and West. But in the North, particularly in Ulster, the situation was very different. The descendants of English and Scottish settlers, now known as Unionists, overwhelmingly opposed Home Rule. Most were Protestant and deeply tied, economically, culturally, and politically, to Britain. They feared that a Dublin-led government dominated by Catholic nationalists would undermine their rights, identity, and economic interests. Ulster was also more industrialized than the rest of Ireland, linked to British trade networks and shipbuilding industries. Unionists saw remaining in the UK as essential for their prosperity. By the early 1900s, political tension intensified. Unionists organized mass protests, formed militias like the Ulster Volunteer Force, and declared they would resist Home Rule, by all means necessary. Nationalists responded by forming their own armed groups. When World War I ended, political compromise became impossible. Ireland moved toward independence, but the North, firmly Unionist, refused to join that path. These conflicting visions for Ireland's future made governing the island as a single political unit impossible, setting the stage for partition in 1921. By the early 1920s, political tensions in Ireland had reached a breaking point. After the Easter Rising of 1916 and the subsequent War of Independence 1919–1921, it became clear that most of Ireland no longer accepted British rule. The independence movement, led politically by Sinn Féin and militarily by the Irish Republican Army (IRA), pushed forcefully for a complete break from the United Kingdom. But the situation in the northern counties remained fundamentally different. Ulster's Unionists, mostly Protestant and deeply connected to Britain, were determined not to be governed by a nationalist, Catholic majority parliament in Dublin. They had already built political structures, paramilitary groups, and mass organizations to resist such a possibility. British leaders recognized that forcing Ulster into an independent Ireland could lead to civil war, and that Irish nationalists would not accept continued British rule over the entire island. The only compromise Britain believed workable was partition. The Government of Ireland Act 1920 formally divided Ireland into two self-governing regions within the UK. Northern Ireland, 6 counties in the northeast where Unionists were a majority. Southern Ireland, the remaining 26 counties. Northern Ireland's boundaries were drawn deliberately to ensure a stable Unionist majority. While Ulster had 9 counties, the 3 that had stronger Catholic majorities were excluded to reduce nationalist political power in the new Northern Ireland state. In 1921, after the Anglo-Irish Treaty ended the War of Independence, the South became the Irish Free State, a self-governing dominion and later a fully independent republic. Northern Ireland exercised its legal option to remain within the United Kingdom. Thus, Northern Ireland came into existence not because of geography but because of conflicting national identities. Unionists insisted on staying British, nationalists in the South sought independence. Partition became the political solution to an island divided between two communities with irreconcilable aspirations. Although partition created Northern Ireland as a political entity, it did not resolve the deep divisions between its communities. From 1921 onward, Northern Ireland had a Unionist-controlled government, since Unionists formed a majority. Many nationalists, mostly Catholic and identifying as Irish, felt marginalized politically, economically, and socially. For decades, discrimination in housing, voting, and employment created a sense of inequality that simmered beneath the surface. In the 1960s, inspired by global civil rights movements, Northern Irish nationalists organized peaceful protests demanding fair treatment. These marches were often met with hostility from some Unionists and harsh responses from the police force, which was seen as Unionist-dominated. Tensions escalated into violence. By the late 1960s, Northern Ireland descended into a 30-year conflict known as the Troubles. Multiple groups became involved. Republican paramilitaries, most famously the Provisional IRA, sought to end British rule and unite Ireland. Loyalist paramilitaries, such as the UVF and UDA, fought to keep Northern Ireland in the UK. British security forces were deployed to maintain order but were seen differently by each community. The conflict involved bombings, shootings, riots, and sectarian killings. More than 3,500 people were killed, and communities became heavily segregated by religion and identity. Everyday life was shaped by fear, suspicion, and physical barriers known as peace walls. Beginning in the 1980s, negotiations slowly gained momentum. Key breakthroughs included the Anglo-Irish Agreement, 1985, and secret talks between governments and paramilitary representatives. This process culminated in the Good Friday Agreement, 1998, a landmark peace deal establishing power-sharing government between Unionists and Nationalists, disarmament of paramilitary groups, cooperation between Northern Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, and the UK. The principle that Northern Ireland's status can change only with majority consent. Today, while tensions remain, the peace process has largely held. Northern Ireland's future is now shaped by democratic choice rather than violence.